following question will be, to what extent did the U-2 incident increase the tension between the U.S. and USSR during the Cold War? First of all, what is the U-2 incident? On May 1st of 1960, a CIA pilot, Francis Gary Powers, was flying at 62,000 feet in a U-2 spy plane that was meant to take aerial photographs of USSR territory. It was a secret mission commissioned by the U.S. government to try and figure out if the Soviet Union had any nuclear technology that they would use on the U.S. The United States had already launched many of these secret missions, and some of their planes had been shot down. But luckily, the USSR couldn't trace any of the remains back to the U.S. However, during this specific event, the pilot survived and was after a few days of not knowing what happened to the U-2 plane. The U.S. thought there would be no evidence of what they're actually doing, because in case of emergency, the spy pilots were told to self-destruct the plane and kill themselves with a needle, in order for there to be no ties back to the U.S. With that in mind, the U.S. said that they were conducting a weather flight test when the plane drifted over Soviet boundaries. However, on May 7th, the USSR leader Nikita Khrushchev told the U.S. that the pilot was not dead, and that the weather-conducting flight trip must not have been true due to the equipment found in the wreck of the plane. This put the United States in a difficult spot, because flying into the Soviet Union was seen as an act of war. So on May 11th of 1960, President Dwight D. Eisenhower made a statement discussing the U-2 flights. In his third point, he said about spying, "It is a distasteful but vital necessity. We prefer and work for a different kind of world, and a different way of obtaining the information essential to competence and effective deterrence. Open societies, in the day of present weapons, are the only answer." This was the reason for my Open Skies proposal in 1955, which I was ready instantly to put into effect, to permit aerial observation over the United States and the Soviet Union, which would assure that no surprise attack was being prepared against anyone. I shall bring up the Open Skies proposal again at Paris, since it is a means of ending concealment and suspicion. This statement showed how the Open Skies Plan, which gave both the U.S. and USSR the ability to fly through each other's territory, should have been used. It also gives us the value that it was said right after the event and was an official statement. However, it doesn't completely show President Eisenhower's view on the matter. After this statement, both countries didn't know what the other would do. Many letters were sent back and forth between the two countries discussing what was happening. One was sent to the United States just asking for an apology, but Eisenhower would not. Based on these disagreements, the Soviet Union left the Paris Summit Conference early, and tensions increased. Pilot Gary Powers was kept in the Soviet Union, put on trial, and was sentenced to 3 years in prison and 7 years of hard labor. However, after 2 years, in 1962, he was traded back to the U.S. for Soviet Union spy Rudolf Abel. Years after the event, in 1970, Francis Gary Powers published a memoir called Operation Overflight, telling his story about the U-2 flight. On page 320, he said, "Regrets? Yes, I have a few. My greatest is not that I made the flight on May 1st, 1960, rather the opposite, that we did not do more when we had the chance. We had the opportunity, the pilots, the planes, and I sincerely believe the need. Yet from the very start of the program, in 1956, we made far fewer overflights of Russia than were possible." Even 10 years after the event, pilot Gary Powers still believes what he did was right, and would do it again. It is valuable because it shows his personal views years later, but it doesn't show the USSR perspective. It only shows the United States view on the matter. With all the problems that occurred because of the U-2 incident, the United States and the Soviet Union went into a deeper conflict during the Cold War. Both sides started to trust each other even less. The USSR feeling like the U.S. was invading its privacy, and the United States scared because they felt the Soviet Union was being too secretive. By looking at the effects that this had on the political relationship between the U.S. and USSR, we can see how tensions grew after the U-2 incident happened.